Welcome to Back on the Broomstick,
a modern witch's spoken word grimoire,
where two witchy friends from way back are reconnecting to their pagan roots after a long period of mundanity.
We're rewalking the path of the wise and trying out all the latest spells, rituals, and magical theory in today's witchcraft and pagan practices.
So grab your wand and your incense,
your cauldron and your crystals,
and join us
as we get
back on the broomstick.
Welcome to Back on the Broomstick. I'm Laylla.
And I'm Chelle. And today we have the absolute pleasure to be talking to Della. For those of you that aren't familiar with Jamie, she is an ordained priestess. She's authored 9 books, one of them being the Book of Spells, The Magic of Witchcraft, as well as the Wicca Cookbook. And she is just an amazing person. And we are going to talk about a new book that is coming out September 26th called A Box of Magick. And this book made me want to live her story. So, Jamie, we welcome you to the show, and we would like you to just tell us a little bit about you. Tell our listeners a little bit about you.
Well, thank you so much for that intro. I mean, you could see me. I'm like, oh, thank you. Just feeling this camaraderie already. We were talking for about 10, 15 minutes. We're like, we need to hit record.
Right.
In any case, my name is Della. My first books were under Jamie Wood. That was my married name. And after I got divorced, I always wanted to change the name, and I couldn't figure out what I would go to. My middle name is Della, which is after my maternal grandmother, who died the month before I was born, and is the first person I met on the other side. The first beginning of knowing that you can speak to people on parallel universes, whether that's your grandmother who has died or the spirit of a tree. Right. So that became my beginning. So instead of when I decided to change my name, instead of being Jamie de la Luna, Jamie de la Tierra, Jamie de la Montañas, I said, you know what? I'm going to stop right there. I've had 5 different last names because of stepdads, other dads being husbands. I stand up for the goddess. I stand up for the matriarchy and the divine feminine. And so I'm just going to stick with Jamie Della in honor of the divine feminine, in honor of this grandmother.
I love that.
And so that's a little bit, that gives you a little inkling of who I am. A little fierce for the woman, a little fierce for my herstory. And it also turned out that it helps that my mother's matriarchal line is so fabulously interesting that my next book is going to be about them, because when I moved, when I was 9 years old, as some of us tend to wake up and start to really...
I read in your book that you think 9 years old is kind of that age where you have that ability to wake up.
Yeah. And and that was introduced to me by Rudolf Steiner through my kids going to a Waldorf school. Uh-huh. So this idea that at 9 years old is when we realize that we are separate from our parents. We aren't like a single unit. And even, and not everyone had that experience, but you start to feel the meanness of yourself, and not so much the unit that you belong to, whatever that is. And then you also start realizing certain things, that maybe there isn't a Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny, and all these stories you've been told. You start to enter this logic, and you see people kind of taking to their bedrooms and reading, and then they keep it really quiet, and then you lay down at night with them, and a 9-year-old will go, and this would happen all day, and then you're like, whoa, because they're processing what it means to wake up. And so for me, that first experience was moving to a location where my ancestors had lived over 250 years, hearing their voices and not knowing what that was. And I had another Nana, which was just, sometimes we get boons in our life. And I had one that was like a Grandma Coco, and the other one who was a psychic tarot reader, who was this fabulous woman, bigger than life, wore silk printed muumuus, and she had been a Birmingham Southern belle, but decided to skip all of that to be a wild woman, just like the rest of us.
I love
doing that. And doing that in the 1930s or 40s is different than doing it today.
Very different. It takes a lot of strength. It took a lot of strength in the 30s for her to do that, I imagine, especially in the South. To be a woman reading tarot in the South had to have been quite the experience. She must have had a big personality to get away with that.
You do. And if she didn't get away with it, she would threaten things like, one time when she would get, this is the grandmother, my Nana, who taught me about 11:11. I'm 8 years old. She says, yes, you have a bright spirit, and that bright spirit's going to attract people who want to talk to you.
Yes.
But you are the one in a body. You are the one having the physical experience. So you have the autonomy to tell them to get out, because you are human and you are carnal and visceral, and they are not. So you have dominion.
I absolutely love that you have this relationship with your grandmothers.
One thing I wanted to point out about that particular part of what you were saying that I find interesting is I feel like people connect with grandparents that have passed first. If you have a grandparent that has passed and is on the other side, and you start having these visions or hearing things or seeing things and making that connection with the other side, it's always a grandparent. I feel if you've had a grandparent pass at that point, almost like they have some like paternal parent obligation. Okay, now that you can see that we're here, I have to be the one to break it to you.
Uh-huh. Yeah, no, I agree. And I feel what's cool about that is, or at least, my first book came out in 2000. So I've had 23 years of learning how to talk about magic in public, and learning how to bridge the gap between what we know and what is visceral and what has been propagandized. So this idea of looking at our grandparents and having a conversation with them, you could be Catholic, you could be Protestant, you could be Buddhist, you could be, you don't have to be a witch to think that that's a thing.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's a good point.
Just a shared experience with Chelle and I, and with you and with other witches that I've spoken to, is that a lot of times these grandparents or elders in our lives were very, very witchy and very pagan. Like you said, your grandmother taught you about 11:11. Our grandparents taught us about, what it means when a fork falls, or that you're supposed to throw salt over your shoulder, to ward off bad spirits. And my grandmother introduced me to tarot and to talking to spirits, but she was a Christian, but this was the other side of her. This was the spiritualist side of her. And she would never have said she was a witch, ever. That was not a word she would use. Chelle's grandmother's like that, and I imagine your grandmother also would not have said that she was a witch, but she still had these
witchy tendencies.
Yeah, right.
Witchy tendencies,
or being part of the archetype of a witch, if that's easier for people. But I think that's part of why. That's why I've always pushed so hard, because people have asked me, like, how was that, in 2000, standing in a Barnes and Noble and saying you're a witch? Like today, it was hard. It was like, why did you do it?
That was one thing I kind of wanted to have us touch on, because we have had such a similar story in the exact same time frame. Laylla and I, we hooked up, what, Laylla, 96, 97, something like
right
that.
around there.
That's kind of about the time where you were doing the same things. And Laylla and I happened to also work at the same place together for a while. And her and I would show up with our pentacles, and we didn't care. And we were treated badly at the employer. And it was rough being out of that broom closet back in the late 90s, early 2000s. We know kind of where our paths led us back into the closet, kind of. But what kind of made you pull away for a while, that made you to a point where now you're kind of, quote unquote, back on the broomstick?
Right. I wanted to be on the podcast and say that. So that was why. Divorce and being a single mom.
Preach it, sister. I hear you.
Yeah. So it was from the 1999 when I first started writing the book, but 2000 up into 2010, the first 8 books I was, just popping them out. And then about that 2009, 2010 is when people started talking about books just going online, and the publishing industry, really having a hard time, and independent publishing coming out, and the market getting flooded, and self-publishing. And so that really changed the landscape. And then just getting tired, I don't know, like I used to go to this one witch shop in Long Beach, and the owner would complain about, the goddess, where is she? I'm doing all this for her, and I'm bringing down $30,000 a year, and I'm opening up this witch shop, and I'm holding this space for her to step in and to rise up. and I'm on the margins and barely affording my rent.
Right.
And I thought, yeah, that, in that perfect world, it's like the minister doesn't need to get paid. Well, the witch
Right.
does need to get paid. We still, like, we can't, good intentions. And I also believe that the collective consciousness was very dense at that time. So fighting it was a lot harder. And it took a lot of us just consistently doing it and showing up. And even though you would feel that sting, like I had one of my books in 2009, 2010, Rahelia's House of Magick, was a young adult book that I had written about a curandera and three. It's kind of like the Sister to the Traveling Pants meets Harry Potter, but they're Hispanic.
I love that.
and someone at junior high school, the vice principal or the high school, ordered 50 books for me to bring for their honor students. And it was because it was based in the same town in Orange County, California. And he thought it would be cool that they were talking about a shop that's just in downtown and whatnot. Well, then someone found out on the school board, that I had written all these nonfiction books, the Wicca Cookbook, the Teen Spell Book, the Wicca Herbal, all these things, that this wasn't a fictionalized account. This was a real witch telling a real story.
Right.
And they pulled the trigger and they said, I'm sorry, you need to come pick up your books.
Really?
We can't do this anymore.
Oh, wow.
And I was steaming. I'm Latina, so I had, like, my hair was way up here. I was so pissed.
But probably also hurt.
And hurt because it was, I remember calling him. I said, okay, Dean, you're a white male in position and you're asking me to fall on my sword, a little brown woman, for you? You want me to fall on my sword for you when you have all the advantages? I called him out. I did everything I could, to make him feel so small, but I went and got the books anyways. And then I have a sticker on there that says I read banned books, because now I have a banned book. So piss off, patriarchy.
Right.
You know what? I am honored to be speaking to an author with a banned book.
I know.
Can I just say that?
Isn't that awesome?
Yes,
that part's good.
Cool.
So why did I keep going? Well, my mother was, and I'm going to date myself, and maybe just the three of us will know. If you ever saw Norma Ray. So my mom marched. My mom was a teacher. She started every revolt for raises and whatnot. And she was just a fighter, going to the Democratic conventions, marching for women from the 70s on. Equality. And so gender equality. So any equality. Yeah. I was just recognizing, like, that's just what you do. You just fight for what you believe in.
Right.
And for me, fighting to be a witch was what I did until I got tired. And until the road kind of closed in front of me, and you're like, oh, there's more blood in this turnip. I need to go somewhere that's going to feed my soul and feed my children. And so I did that. And then, so I did that from 2010 on. I just stopped writing books and just tried to do the office thing. And I'd have a job for a couple of years, and then I'd quit very ceremoniously. And then I'd try to do the independent thing and just kind of go, I guess my book career is dead, and kind of an Eeyore thing, not realizing that social media was picking it up, where I wasn't paying attention, that Instagram and, eventually TikTok and Facebook and all this was building up the industry. And I didn't know, I didn't pay attention. I turned my back on it all, bitter as the store owner, I did everything I could, and the goddess didn't show up for me, kind of a feeling.
Sure.
And then,
or did you do the thing that I did? I'm too old for TikTok.
Oh, definitely. And also I was in marketing, but public relations to me was corporate social responsibility. It wasn't about TikTok views. That's not why I got educated in that path.
The times they have a change.
Exactly. So I didn't realize this. And so what happened was, I had my sons moved out. I moved up to the mountains. They went on to college. And I was menopausal, empty nest. What's the other one that I isolated because I moved to a mountain town, left like 700 people, used to this big Mexican family. And suddenly I was alone with my man, who liked to work more than I realized. And then the publisher called me and said, Jamie, would you consider updating the teen spell book? In 2018, they called me and said, would you like to do this? And they said, witchcraft is really getting popular. I'm like, oh, is it? Oh, there's this thing called witch talk now, like 2 million. I'm like,
Yes.
really? And I didn't know. I was the
I
country
call
mouse.
Layla and I'm like, is witch talk like TikTok? Are they similar? And she laughed at me.
Right? Yeah.
It's wild how our lives have these cycles, and you
Mhm.
go into the fullness of life and you start writing books. And Chelle and I were teaching classes and doing workshops on the East
Mhm.
Coast and trying to educate people at the same time. And we were very involved. You were very involved and
Mhm.
fighting the good fight at a time when it was
Right.
very difficult to stand up. You had books out. I mean, when we first started, there were very few books out in the mid
Right.
Yeah.
90s, there was almost nothing.
No,
And
I know.
so to be a person to have that strength was fantastic. But here we are, fullness of life, doing the witch thing, and then comes a time to go within. You kind of pull back from that for different reasons and take care of your family, take care of yourself. Find, like you said,
Mhm.
there's no more blood in that turnip. You need to refuel yourself, refill your soul. And
Mhm.
now's a time to come back out again. And you received that call through your publisher who was like, we need you again. Things are rising. Witchcraft is rising right now. And
Yeah.
voices like yours are needed.
And it was so cool. One of the other things, because I love serendipity more than anything. It's one of my favorite things because I'm a storyteller. So I like a good bookend. Drop me a hint, give me a little something, and then like wrap it up in the end. So I love that the Book of Spells, which is what I took the teen spell book, and I took out everything that was related to just being a teenager, but kept everything that began as a teenager. Maybe the first time you really dealt with loneliness or depression, or how do you fit in or not fit in? How do all the things that begin as we begin to adult, that begin at that impressionable age, but last through our whole lives. And I love the fact that those two books are 18 years apart,
Wow.
a full adult. I love that the book grew up and is no longer a teenager, because I got that invitation too. That you put out this call and the universe said that with the teen spell book. I was reading Louise Hay, some affirmation about letting go of your teenage angst and moving on. I'm like, whatever. My mom still, I still had
So Gen
stories
X.
that I was holding. Yeah. I was still holding on to the mommy stories. I was still holding on to all these things. And I thought, I am not going through my Saturn's return into my 30s carrying this bag with me.
Right.
And that's why I wrote the teen spell book. And then as it revived, it became the most important thing was to empower people. Because to me, a spell book should look like a cookbook, where there's parts of it that at least that's me. And I don't like to shit on people. So it's just the way I decided to put it together. But that you give some explanation of the correspondences, that you like cinnamon's going to be like this, and flour is going to do this, and this is going to happen at high altitude, and these are all the tools that you'll work with. This is what, like the old Betty Crocker books, The Joy of Cooking, that like in the beginning had all like how to
what I like what you did is you're like, well, you could use an athame or you could use some garden shears, whatever you want to bless for your intentions. I'm like, I love that. I love
yes.
that.
Well, I just, I felt like we were saying earlier, 20 years ago, what was available was Wicca, right? Like that's what most of us saw. And then I noticed when the Book of Spells people commented like, oh, it's just a Wicca book. I'm like, did I not mention that? Like, did I fail to mention that? Like, but after that, it's your interpretation.
Right.
Whatever cuts, whatever blade you need is the blade you have. And that athame could even, be a pencil. But for me, I never had an athame. I just wasn't drawn to get that tool. And then recently I bought one and now I have it. But before, I always just use my two fingers.
That's awesome, because using two fingers for 30 years, that's what people need to know. Because I think that's one thing that bothers me right now about the witch talks and about Instagram is they make these folks feel like you have to spend thousands of dollars to be able to make magic. So I love that you just bought your first athame, because you don't need $100 athame to be able to do magic. Your two fingers are just as good as what you bought at a shop or on a catalog or the evil Amazon guy.
No, exactly. And just the two fingers, the pointer and the middle finger, just in case, because that's because that's just how it was always done. And then the other thing is we were taught the pentacle in different directions to either, you know, banish or attract one of the elements. So that's so much easier when you can just, you know, do it really quickly with your two fingers, or create a pentacle, you know, prior to putting a spell on it. You just draw it out. Like, that's just, we learned the gritty way.
Yes.
Where you didn't get all the tools because you were waiting for the special one.
We didn't have what is available now back then.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. We didn't have access. So we learned that if we can't buy a special cauldron, then we hold our womb.
Right. Exactly.
And point the two fingers or whatever it is.
And I think that's a big difference in, like you said, in the beginning, it was all Wicca. And that didn't exactly sit perfectly right with everybody. We didn't all fit into that mold.
But it was your only option at the time.
Right.
The only easy option. But there were other ways to learn and other people to learn from. And because of learning by doing and learning from people who followed magical traditions that weren't Wicca, that really helped us to grow. And because of that learning by doing and by repetition, and from people who followed traditions that weren't Wicca, we could use these other tools. We could know that you can use garden shears or a pencil or whatever instead of an athame. You know, you can use something different for that, what works for you. And I love that in your new book that's coming out, In a Box of Magick, it just reinforces the idea that a teacher can help with that. You know, books can take you so far, but a mentor or a teacher can take you that much further. And I love that in your book, you I won't give it all away, but you talk about your mentor, Connie, and I absolutely fell in love with her in this book. You, at the time that you met her, were an accomplished witch. You had 2 books under your belt. You have been doing rituals and spells on your own and with other people for a while. And here you are, a neophyte, learning again.
An initiate.
And we've been doing this for 30 plus years and we're still learning. It's a lifelong learning process. And I just love that you share that experience, that whole hero's journey of going through this, you know, at a time in your life when you're already a quote unquote expert, you know, and now you get this new learning. And I just love that idea of having a mentor and being with someone, because we could use that at any stage in our lives. And do you have any mentors now, or, you know, anything you want to share about, you know, your journey with Connie?
Thank you so much for all of that. And that was my number one intention, because I felt as I re-entered the witchcraft, or as I entered the techno witchcraft, you know, online witchcraft realm, with the Book of Spells, I realized, because someone asked me like, well, what made you think it was a good idea to put out a new book of spells? And I thought, oh, honey, this book has been around for.
Why would it not be a good idea? Would be my rebuttal, but
yeah, exactly. But I was like, oh, I went with the Capricorn indifference of, darling, this book has been out since 2001. You know, but it's like, I'm not new to this, I'm true to this. But I felt that for me, I really wanted to show. So many times, you know, you look at the books are important, and some people are learning through memes, and that was great because I feel like it allowed witchcraft to grow at an exponential rate.
Made it
accessible. Now it made it accessible, but now I feel like it needs to pull back a little bit to make it authentic. And there's that, like, let's just pull this back a little bit, because I'm not going to tell you every crystal that I think is associated with air, and I'm not going to memorize every herb that Apollo would have carried around with him. Like, that's just not, but it's also whether I live it. And I really felt that's what Connie taught me, was not about spouting it in some rote memorization, but living it and applying it. And it's, to me, you know, when like my publisher recently just said, oh, take a picture of your altar. My first thought is, we don't do that. And then I'm like, okay, people do that today, so I'll just create an altar to take a picture of. You know, and that to me is different, rather than taking, you know, taking a picture of, for example, I was able to capture my last moon cycle on this red cloth, and that red cloth holds my most precious stones that sits on my inner altar, like the inner altar. I know for those of us who've been around, we have the altars people can see, and the altars that are the inner altar,
which is what makes this whole internet thing kind of weird, because I get it. It's like, I don't want to post that. That's my altar stuff. But in the same respect, you gotta post something.
Yeah. And I feel like having that intentional and sharing what I'm comfortable with, and saying, you know what, this image of the sacred cloth with my sacred blood isn't something I'm going to share, but I'll share with you the process of making lilac oil. I'll share with you, how do I draw an anathema in an earth banishing way and an earth invoking way? How do I can show you those things that I learned sitting at Connie's knee. And I find that that's what's important about is in the application, because yes, I was in that position of, 2 books, but my marriage was falling apart and I didn't know how to apply my spirituality to my life. And I needed a mentor for that.
Yes. We need someone sometimes to make those connections. Yeah. And to know if you're doing a ritual for yourself and you reach for, a clear quartz instead of a rose quartz, to trust your intuition, to trust why you did that, and to know that there's a reason for that. And sometimes we can doubt that if we're by ourselves. So having a mentor,
or you have no one to talk it out with, especially as myself and other women that I know, our way of processing is through communication and is through our relationship, and it's hashing it out. I don't think it out, I talk it out. And so having a mentor who's 20 years older, I was just exiting my Saturn's return and she was first and she was entering her second, so she had the shit or get off the pot moment. And I had the, who am I? Right. Things. And so I feel like her shit or get off the pot moment was making sure that her legacy would continue. Making sure that this legacy would continue, this idea of empowering women and each other. And I get stuck with that a lot. The women part, forgive me if I say something that's offensive to anybody who is non-binary. For me, growing up in the 70s, it was important to raise awareness of the power and of nurturing women, of beautiful, strong women in whatever shape they want to show up, but valuing women and bringing back value to women, to me, was why I loved Wicca so much, because it placed the god and the goddess on the same pedestal.
You just hit on one of my biggest things, because at that time in the 80s, when I first started finding goddess religions, it was such a revelation. It was women.
A revelation. Starhawk's book was like, what?
Holy cow, women are wild and wonderful. Periods are not dirty. Sex is not dirty. We can own ourselves and our bodies, and God and goddess are equal, and divine feminine, and this yin and yang, and we all have equality. Was wonderful. It was invigorating. It was what we needed at the time, the womb and the vagina and all of it. We were claiming all of this and owning it. And it was so powerful. And it's a little exclusionary now. We know that now. But at the time, it was necessary. We needed that resurgence, I think, to kind of find that footing. And now we do need to be more inclusive with everyone. And I think a lot of paganism is perfectly situated for that, because we do accept that we all have all these different energies, the giving, the receiving, however you want to call it, within ourselves, and however we express that is fine. But I just love hearing, it was such an amazing revelation at the time to know that a woman, a goddess, could be that powerful, because we grew up in I grew up in such a very oppressive Christian, idea. And I think this is such a, it was amazing. So I just love hearing your experience, kind of mirroring that, to feel that goddess within you. And
Chelle, what about you regarding this topic?
Jamie, I was just, when you were telling that experience, all I could think of is the three of us are from a generation where probably in 1982 we're running around the kitchen while our mothers were singing that song, I Am Woman, Hear Me Roar.
Helen Reddy. I have the album.
It's so right, and that's kind of what it was. We were kind of the first generation of females that we were going to do what we wanted, how we wanted, and when we wanted, because our mothers kind of had it, but kind of not.
Right.
And, I remember being that 8, 10, 12-year-old with my mother screaming at the top of her lungs around the house, I am woman, hear me roar.
Oh, yeah.
And
I love it. Exactly. 100%.
So when you were saying that, all I could think of is that song. I equate everything to a song. It's how I
Oh
am.
yeah. Oh yeah. No, that and the other song, speaking of albums and whatnot that opened up that idea of equality was Free to Be You and Me.
Yeah.
With Marlo Thomas, and just this idea of that it was so new to explore that William wants a doll, or it was so amazing that Atlantis
or that Mary was going to have a job and live on her own in her own apartment without Ken living with her,
Yeah. And that all these different things, but also finding that balance of like that girl that was always squeaking, then she's the first one they got, fed to the lion, like finding that balance, because spirit does not have gender, but there is this expression of an in-breath and an out-breath. So even as we are still so producing and we have a hard time being and introspection, that's still the goddess energy that hasn't been fully accepted by everybody, that we're still pushing for. So you might not call it the divine female, but it is her energy, the dark, the introspection, the winter, that we still have to honor. And now we've swung that pendulum with our shadow, and everyone's looking for their shadow like they're Peter Pan on the loose. Where is it?
Right.
And for me, the shadow is more of a portal. It's an opportunity to see things differently, to enter a new realm.
See, everybody talks about shadow work today like it's a new revelation. And Jamie,
Right.
maybe you'll feel me on this one. Layla, not so much. You want shadow work? Get divorced, friends. You'll have the best shadow work period of your life.
Yeah.
So, it kind of seems like a hot topic now, but I feel like I went through a lot of that back several years ago when you're trying to, for the first time, make your way by yourself with your kids. There's some shadow.
Mm-hmm.
There's some shadow work. And I think that, and Layla was a part of my life at that time. If I didn't go through that deep, dark shadow work time, I probably wouldn't be who and what and how I am today. So for the people that are seeking shadow work, you are better on the other side, but it's painful. But for me, and I know that yours is a similar story. You want some shadow work, divorce will get you right there.
Right. Divorce will get you there. Death will get you there. Debt will get you there. All the things that really hurt. And we know we don't look for the shadow because we know it'll find us. Yeah. We're like, he's out there. But and like you said, that was one of the things in my book, The Enchanted Diary. I was able to ask this class of Waldorf kids, what was something that happened to you that was painful at the time, but if it hadn't happened, you wouldn't be who you are today. Exactly what you said. Whether that was being teased or having a emotionally unavailable parent, or, whatever the story is, it's a feeling of loneliness or a feeling of betrayal or a feeling, but the feelings pass, but the stories is where we dwell.
But I don't think people realize nowadays that right there is shadow work. They think it's some glorious, mystical land, and it's really you picking up the pieces of your shit show life.
Yeah. And accepting yourself.
Yes. Right. And moving past it.
And accepting integrating.
Yeah.
Thanks. 1, 2, 3, 4.
I owe you a Coke now.
Yeah, exactly.
But we've kind of touched on some other topics with your older books. And one thing that we definitely wanted to touch on with this new book, A Box of Magick, is we want to talk a little bit about ancestor work with you, because Laylla is very deep into that right now, and you touch on it a lot. So we want to get some thoughts on ancestor work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a lot of story with that. I'm literally, the next book I'm writing is about my grandmother from 5 generations ago.
Ooh.
So, and the reason I'm doing that work is she was, after my first grandmother, she was the next grandmother who spoke to me. So we moved to this land. This had a little house, and in Orange County, and right like 2 blocks away, an ancestor had built the first adobe in 1806. So those were the ancestors that were talking about me. That close. These were the ancestors that were talking to me. So I was always hearing their voices, always wondering what was going on. And their story is big. They were the Californios who came to California. They were the Spanish and Mexican army and ministers who came to California to colonize California and create the mission system that decimated 90% of the indigenous population. Right. So I you wake up and I had these strong witch tendencies. I would go to the Bowers Museum as in the book, and I ask about, could I be, because you didn't have ancestry.com. You had to order birth and death certificates to find out any information about your ancestors. You had to feel into them, find their graves, sit there, on Dia de los Muertos or Halloween and give them some tequila and some, marigolds and go, talk to me. What do you got? I have this feeling, but I don't have enough information. I feel like you want me to heal something in this land, something that happened, but I need more information.
Why can't they speak more plainly, the ancestors? My goodness.
I don't know. They're speaking a different language is what it is.
Yes.
And it's a vibrational language, right? That's it. They're speaking the vibrational language, and we need to, whatever, maybe sometimes get out the prejudices that we have of, oh, how could that be my uncle? He was a gambler. He wouldn't be talking like this, whatever the story is, letting them come in however they come in.
Preconceived notion.
Yeah, of what and who they are and whatnot. Right. So I feel that I myself am very pulled and have been for 40 years. I've been researching my ancestors for 40 years. So I'm very pulled to learn who they are, what they're doing, why do they keep talking to me? What do they want? And I feel like you can do that just like anybody else, though. I think sometimes we tend to think of ancestors as the holier than thou, like they're more important than our children almost, or more important than our jobs. That if you're called to do ancestor work, then you're supposed to drop everything. Well, I don't think that's true. I think there comes a time, like these ancestors, at first I glorified them, and then I realized they were colonists, and then I hated myself for thinking that I had adored a colonist, and then I'm like, how do I decolonize myself? When did I do that? Because people would say, oh, you are early California, the California dons and doñas, like the fandangos, or you're like royalty. I mean, people tell you that from the time you're 8 years old. You start to go, I'm royalty.
Sure.
And it made it easier to walk through Orange County as a hippie when you could tell them that you were royalty. I mean, you played their game of status.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And then there comes a time, I feel, that the ancestor work can drain you. And I don't feel like today we give that enough credit. Because if they're pushing at you, heal this, we did wrong, or we were done wrong by, and we want our stories told, and this and this.
We can only do so much on this plane at a time.
Yeah. And I feel like that's what's really important. I feel like ancestral work is super important. That's what I'm doing. That's my goal, to write this book. It's not going to right any wrongs, because you can't bring back people, that you've lost. You can't bring back culture or language once it's lost. And I also believe that theirs was a time that I need to explore for some reason, and it's going to break something open in me. Diving back into 1839 is October 1839 is what I'm writing today. To dive into a certain flood at this river at this time, to close my eyes and see it and be able to just describe what I'm seeing, is such powerful work. It will release something in me, but I have to monitor my energy on it. And I really think that's important for people doing ancestry work.
Yes. You had mentioned something at the beginning of our talk where, as you were being born, your grandmother had passed, and you met in that liminal space between here and there. And that really kind of not necessarily fed or created this in you, but it helped keep that conduit open for you, and to the point where you had to learn to shut that down a little bit. And I think what you're saying here, with it being very much an energy drain, some people don't necessarily know that, they'll keep giving and giving and giving. And I think learning to say no, or to set boundaries, magically or otherwise, is a very important lesson. You said your grandmother had taught you a little bit how to tell them, this is my space, you can't come in. And I think learning that is an important lesson at any age.
At any age.
You have to treat it like a telephone. You don't always pick up the phone when it rings. Well, when it comes to spirits, you don't always pick up the phone when it rings.
Exactly. And it also is like an idea that we'll find birth through somebody else. So if you keep saying no, then that information might go to your cousin, or it might go, wherever else. So, for me, that's how I feel. So at this point, I just recently, ancestry work, I found her name, finding, Maria Espíritu de Santos. So I was like Mother of Most High. So when I went to Spain this spring, and they told me there was this big church, it was the most, it was Mary of the Most High, Maria Espíritu de Santos. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to go here. So you follow, right? You follow your instincts. You go to the church. And I said, okay, I think you're the grandmother I'm supposed to write about. If you are, I need you to give me a sign, as we do, right?
Right.
And so I'm on the way on the plane ride home, bing, a note from ancestry.com. And there is her picture. I have looked for this woman for decades. The last daughter of the dawn. I've been looking for her for decades. And she's like, here I am. And I'm
Ask,
like,
you shall receive.
Exactly. Because divine timing, which is the other reason that doesn't always get included in the spell work of today, that you are not manifesting alone. Right. You didn't get that parking spot all on yourself. That was something by working with the universe and working with divine timing. And that's when you park there, because that's when the universe in its harmony needed you to park there. And that to me is so important, to recognize that we are, and we say it all the time. We're part of the web. We're part of the unity. We're part of, you know what I mean? And then we're like, and I got this,
right. It's more working with, recognizing the energies that we're working within. We're not manipulating them, or I'm not doing this. It's I am working with the energies of the universe, with the energies of these other living things to create this reality together. I'm not imposing my will. I'm asking for help, and I'm working with you.
Co-manifestation.
Yeah. And I feel like that's really important for herbs, especially because people will say, I used lavender in the spell. I used cannabis today, whichever it is,
you worked with.
And I feel that that's why ritual herbalism is part of the title of this book. And that's really not any different than green witchcraft, with the exception of something I would add that I don't know is always in green witchcraft, but is this reciprocity of respect with the consciousness of the plant world and the alive world and and nature.
We're all over here nodding. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
100% agreeing.
Yeah, it's so important, because I would never say I used Laylla and Chelle for a podcast.
Right.
Because we know magic is in the relationships. Like if you have a plant ally, you're just going to go to basil every single time. Or if you have a favorite crystal wand or a favorite cup you like to use, even like to make it mundane,
Geez, Rosemary just entered the chat here, so called out a little with favorite herbs. Good gracious.
Exactly. But the thing of it is, just like you were saying earlier about the longevity of the practice and how it deepens within you, when you started working with rosemary 30 years ago, it meant one thing to you. Exactly. And then every time you put it on an altar, it gets another nuance.
Can I tell you a secret, Jamie?
Yes.
30 years ago, I thought rosemary was just a crock of junk because it was found in the kitchen. And I thought because you found it in the kitchen that it wasn't really magical. Boy, was I wrong.
Talk about learning and growing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
You take for granted the stuff that's around you, I think sometimes, especially back then I was so new. I didn't know. I thought, well, this is in the kitchen. It can't be good.
Well, because we always felt that magic had to be worked for, like in this really hard way.
And now I realize that it's a staple.
Yeah.
And that's part of that stages thing.
Yeah, no. And the stages, like, yeah, like if you said I'm a witch at 11, it means one thing. At 22, it means something else. 34, 75, it all means Halloween's going to mean something different every time.
Right.
It's going to deepen in you. And that's the relationships. Like you'd ask a friend to take you to the airport. You wouldn't ask a stranger.
Right.
So that's true if you're working with deities as well. You create relationships with them. You build an altar for them. You bring them water or flowers or wine or honey or whatever, so that when you're ready to call on them, you've already got the relationship.
Right. Yes, I love that so much, because I feel that so much working with anything, with crystals, with tools, with herbs that you're familiar with, that sense of reciprocity, that sense of we are in this together. We're a team here, and okay, lavender, right now I feel you're a very happy herb, and we're going to work with that aspect of you. And the herb will say, okay, or it'll say no, and you'll move to something different, but you can listen to them. And
as an herbalist, there's been times where I've been like, look, this is all I got. I need you to help me with this. And I know this isn't really your job. I feel like I'm asking somebody at work to do something they shouldn't. I'm like, I know this isn't your job, but I really need you right now for this. I've done that more times than I can imagine.
Right. Or the time when you're like, you're walking in like in the kitchen, let's say, right? Or in your yard and you're like, who is calling me? And then you like, and then there's the chamomile. You're like, oh, I do need to calm down. Yeah. And I, that's the thing I like to say too, is that they can call to us as much as we call to them, because we're all in it together, because it only behooves the plant world to wake us up, and have us see that reciprocity and be responsible.
It's a mutual relationship. It's not, like you said before, it's not us using, working with. And when you work with, that is a give and take on both ends.
Yes. And recognizing that, like you said, that if you have that relationship, you can say, okay, I know you're normally a purifier, but today I need you to do protection. So figure out how to purify the space that protects me.
Yes,
yes. Done on your end, and we'll get this done on our end. Yeah,
exactly. And finding that harmony, I think, as witches, as pagans, as heathens, we look for that harmony with other people, with spell aspects or components or the natural world. We're looking for that harmony. We're trying to work together. And I know you also work with environmental activism, that you're very active in that.
I saw on your bio that I was looking at that you have launched Every Last Drop. Tell me what that is. Talk to me about Every Last Drop.
Okay, I'll talk to you about that. Thank you so much. I, as a witch, I believe we are all activists because we honor the four directions, and we honor the elements, and we honor the water. That's always been very important to me. I live in Southern California, and then I moved up to the Eastern Sierra, and I, like a lot of people, had heard about the water wars from the turn of the century out here in California, and everyone just thinks, oh, that's old history. But it's not, because they're currently, the city of Los Angeles intimidated a lot of people to buy the land that would include the waterways from the water coming out of the Eastern Sierra and bringing it 300 miles south to Los Angeles. I didn't realize that what it was creating, firestorms up, the potential for firestorms up here, arsenic from Mono Lake once the water is drained, and the audacity that 70% of that water they take is for their lawns just made me,
really?
Like it just made me so upset with the injustice of it, and it just being a David and Goliath story, which, I'm kind of a sucker for those. So I wanted to be part of building that awareness in Los Angeles. So I started a newsletter with the Keep Long Valley Green Association. And this is an organization that brings together ranchers who have been here for 4 generations, but they originally stole the land from the indigenous people here. Mm-hmm. But the indigenous tribes, the Paiute and the Numu, they are here and bonding with these people that 4 generations ago, there was a lot of bloodshed and a lot of heartache. And they're working with the scientists who are working with the environmentalists who are working with, it's the most diverse range of environmentalists. It's people coming together that would normally not fight together, but they're fighting together for justice and for water. And so, and the irony is those same people from Los Angeles will come to these areas and vacation here. And they have no idea that they're creating, that there is this love-hate relationship. They're completely oblivious to it. And so I wrote this newsletter, but I was starting to get so mad in the writing of the newsletter with the, there's like, Los Angeles Department of Water and Power has 1,300 wells in this area and they haven't completed the mitigation that they were required to do from 1971 from some of these, or was it 91? I might be lying as I saw Chelle. It's been a very, very long time. And
I'm just thinking that's older than me.
I know. They get to just keep lying and have bigger lawyers, and they have an entire floor dedicated to their lawyers to fight for water that is destroying an ecosystem so that they can have fake lawns in a desert. It's just so frustrating to me. So I was getting so angry, kind of like almost like if you do the ancestry work and you realize your family was slave owners and you start to feel really bad about something that you weren't even alive for. Like that's when your ancestry work is hurting you and you have to do something different. You have to pull back if you can't pivot. So that's what I decided. I had to pivot. So then next to me, my neighbor had started this newsletter. I was so proud of it. And I was starting to get angry, like where you're kind of, when you're fighting the good fight, but you're always a little too angry and you can't let it go. And I realized that I was getting to that point, and I could feel it, because one of the first idioms I ever remember hearing was, anger corrodes the vessel that contains it. Ooh. So I didn't want to be that person that was holding onto this bile, but I didn't know how to shake it. And then our neighbor next door, he ripped out a lot of like 6 or 7 pine trees that were just huge and all this native vegetation, and put in 7,500 acres of fake lawn. And the John Muir Wilderness begins like 2 houses at the end of the cul-de-sac. It was bringing the suburbs literally to the wild.
Horrible.
And I was getting so mad at him, and I was just filling up with so much anger from writing the newsletters and having all the details to seeing it happening next door to me. And then one of my friends said, you know what? We have that murder mystery dinner play here in town. Why don't you just write the next play and kill him? And I was like, you know what? Wicca means wise, or to bend or shape the unseen forces. Yes. I was angry, an unseen force. I was getting to the point where that anger was building up inside of me and hurting me. And I decided I wanted to pull back, but I couldn't. So I pivoted and I wrote a satire, and I played the wife. So I could be the most obnoxious person who is the onceler's wife, who just disregards things and throws them. And that was another level of activism, because we could introduce that these ideas, these stories are still going on. And through satire, you can say almost anything. Like The Simpsons taught us that, you know? Right. So, you know, and then new shows to keep taking it to the next level. But the fact of the matter is, that's magic, to bend or shape the unseen forces. So you do your activism and you go where you can. And if it's hurting you, you have to recognize when it's hurting you and when you need to pull back or pivot.
Right.
You know, and so that's what I did. And that's part of my activism, was to be part of that. And I worked for the land trust and holding land. And then just recently we were able to buy an old cannabis farm and turning it over in a responsible way and bringing it back to the forest and back to the land and back to real homesteading. And now that's kind of my next version. It's not a fight, it's living the dream. Because sometimes we're on the front end and we're fighting the baddies. And then sometimes we're like, okay, I fought a bunch of baddies and now I've got a pantry full. So you know what? I'm going to go sit down and you got this.
I love how you talk about transforming that energy, taking that energy that you had that felt like it was corroding you from the inside out, because we can't stop these big corporations by ourselves, but we can do smaller things. You can pivot, like you said, and turn that energy into a satire that woke other people up, that brought people awareness to this. You could channel that energy into another way, to purchasing land and bringing that back to the forest. You know, you're doing what you can in your place and in your ways. You're sending that energy out in a very positive way and transforming it to help yourself, to help the land, and to help teach other people. And that's powerful. That's magical.
Yeah. And there's so many different ways. I mean, they're little mundane ways too. Like we have here in California, we have adopt a highway signs, and I've seen them in other states so I had one right here where Long Valley is this area where I live, where we need to get an agreement from Los Angeles Department of Water and Power that they won't suddenly turn our water off, or they won't divert it away, that we would not have water for our wells. So we're trying to get them to have this agreement, and they don't want to abide by it. So when my partner who works for the road department saw, oh, there's an open sign here for keeping the highways clean, I got it for our Airbnb and I held it until I could hand it over to keep Long Valley green. Yes. So there's different things that we can do, because we need to change the way we look at the earth and the way we respond to her. And we're going to do that through tourism. We're going to do that through business. We're going to do it through literature. We're going to do it through email newsletters and plays, and finding as many different creative ways, like water itself. That's the other thing, is anything you're trying to save, embody its properties. Water will move anywhere. So be flexible. if that's what you're trying to work to save. If it's the trees, if it's the earth, then you're gonna do your work with that steadiness.
Stand your ground. Yeah.
And stand your ground. And I feel that the elementals are just like, yes, now you're getting it. Now you're getting it, because we're not going to get there until we all elevate in our consciousness. And if we are those forerunners that are showing this is how you live with water, is when you realize it's not going anywhere, to divert it, move it around it. So that was the thing with water, right? I couldn't really retreat. Water doesn't really retreat unless there was a tide, but I could
then it comes right back.
Then it comes right back again anyway. Yes. So yeah.
You've got my brain going in so many different directions. There's so much I could talk to you about. I really enjoyed your book. I very much liked how it was a story. It was not just a recipe book, which is great. I like those too, but this was very nice to read. You told a story through the whole thing, and there's spells, and there's magic, and there's ritual, hidden or not so hidden in the stories as you're reading it. And this whole journey that you went through, it's mirrored in so many people's lives. That whole idea of, you came here a little broken in the beginning, a little lost, a little searching, and you find that strength, and you find other people, and you go on this journey. And we're all kind of doing that right now, I think. And
but what I like the best about your book is I feel like it's dual authored, and you're being taught by two people, which I think was part of your intent. Yes. I actually think I might have read that in the introduction, that was part of your intent. But you really get that sense that it's Jamie and Connie giving you this information.
Yeah.
She's there.
She's totally there. She's 100% there. And I felt like that was a really important thing to do, is to give people someone who's in their 30s and kind of like, oh, what do you think? What do you think? Little Tigger bouncing around, like, will this spell work? What if I use this alphabet? What if I use this? And you're like, it's you, it's in you. What if I use this pen? What if I use this sword? It's in you. It's in, and then the 55-year-old who's saying like, baby girl, like, you got this, like, just hold yourself steady and push your energy through. And it was so important for me to, like you said earlier, for people to see that you will always be growing, and that you will always want that someone who can reflect back to you what you can't see in yourself. And I felt like that was really important. I wanted to kind of have people kind of come away with that feeling of, do I need a mentor right now? Or am I a mentor? Who do I go to? And also recognizing that asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength, because it means you trust, you have that vulnerability, you have that strength to be vulnerable, to trust that reaching out will be met by the universe.
And for you, it was.
But I really wanted to give people someone else, to that kind of grandmotherly figure, back to the grandmother, back to for me, what it means to be in a lineage of strong women, but strong people who identify with the nurturing, with the quiet, with the introspection, that quiet strength. That's what I really wanted to emphasize. So for me, it's kind of like Tuesdays with Maury, because you might remember that one, with the exception of it being two witches, instead of two scholars or two men, it's two female witches, and the power of female friendship. And I really want to, that power, that potential of female friendship. I mean, look at you two, right? How you have held each other up over a few decades here to become this empowered, and then to have someone who's seen everything you've been through and look at you and go, you rock. You're still here. You kept reinventing yourself. Even when it was hard, you kept going. And there's someone who's watched you on your journey. It is so empowering, and it feels like you're so loved and you belong at least to someone. And I want people to have that sense of belonging to themselves, to their magic, and, to a book that can make them want to connect.
Thank you so much for sharing Connie with us and sharing your book with us. I felt like I knew her through this, and I hope everyone gets a Connie of their own. So again, exactly. Your next book, A Box of Magick, is coming out the end of September. So I loved it. Please run out, get your own copy. It is chock full of personal stories, spells, rituals, correspondences. It's a fabulous book, and I highly recommend it. So Thank you so much, Jamie, for sharing yourself and your book with us.
We are blessed to have you here today, and we do appreciate the time.
Oh my gosh, I love connecting with other women who have walked this path, because it's for so long, and to know why it's important to remind the youthful witches today, just like we would remind, people of color, or people of gender fluidity, or people of, whatever it might be, that how hard it was to get here means we have to really honor and appreciate it. And I think that's really important, because yes, I was one of those that I'm saying I'd like you to honor me, but I also want you to honor Chelle, and I want you to honor Laylla, and I want that people to recognize that we are what kept that dream alive, so that the internet could pick it up.
Well, thank you. I didn't think of it that way, but I appreciate it. All of us witches, especially the witches nowadays, I'm loving the growth and the resurgence. It's absolutely amazing to watch. So thank you again, Jamie.
And thank you for listening to this episode of Back on the Broomstick. If you could star us, subscribe, share, comment, friend us on Instagram, or shoot us an email at backonthebroomstick@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Keep it witchy.